Hello, everyone. I'm Peter Freer. I'm founder and CEO of Play Attention, and I am delighted you are with us. It is a lovely fall day down in the mountains of North Carolina where we have Play Attention, and I am definitely glad you're here. Today, we're going to be talking about nurturing independence and the link between self-regulation and building an independent child or nurturing an independent child. That'll be the topic. I do want to give you a little bit of background about me before we begin, just so you know who the heck it is you're talking with today. And I'd like to consider this a talk that we could have together. So you can type in comments. I will try, or questions. I'll try to get to those at the very end of the presentation today. So please feel free to, so that we can have just an interchange, right, of dialogue, so that we can learn a lot more. One of the things also I'd like to ask you to do before we begin to get into the webinar is to silence your cell phone. If you're watching the webinar on your cell phone, then please don't turn it off. But for all other purposes, one of the nemesis, a nemesis to our ability to pay attention is our cell phone. And I'll discuss that a little bit more as we move along. And if you turn it off and you can pay full attention to this, it will help you learn, especially if it's important to you. So just make it a priority, if you would, to silence your cell phone or turn it off if you're not using it to watch the webinar today. My background was actually education before I got started in the field of neurocybernetics. I had specialties in science, physics, mathematics, and computer programming. And the one child that sparked this off in me was named John. And this was back in the mid-1980s, believe it or not. And John was put in my classroom because I was the only male teacher in K through 6. I was the only male educator. And they felt that when John hit 6th grade, he had really had a tough time with the other teachers, and being a male, well, they gave me a lot of credit for being a disciplinarian, when indeed I really felt that having a child learn was its greatest discipline. There is discipline in being able to learn. So that was my philosophy. But being a male, they gave me John. And John had quite an attention problem. I didn't know what to do. It's my first year of teaching. And so I went back to university to ask my professors what to do. They said, well, pull John close to your desks, that you can have proximity control. He'll behave better when he's close to you. Give him an individualized education plan, his own curriculum, so that you can cater to his needs specifically. I did all of those things, all of those accommodations. And I was doing reasonably well with John. He was exceeding what he had done in years before with just a few techniques like that. However, his impulsivity, his desire to be the class clown didn't change much. And I was patient and empathetic with him, since I knew that he had this thing called ADD, is what we called it at the time. Right before that, it was minimal brain dysfunction. But in the mid-1980s, I think we were calling it ADD at the time. Not positive about that. So I kind of understood. I got a background from my professors what I was up against. Never seen it before in my life. And we were doing well together. But John was telling me, though, that at home, when he didn't behave or he answered back, I think he said talked back. When he talked back to his dad used the strap. What a strap was his father's belt. Now, at the time, his father wasn't beating him badly, but he received some straps, some whippings on his behind. And it wasn't considered in those days to be child abuse. Nowadays, what John received would be child abuse, definitely. But in those days, it was not. And I felt bad for John because his parents could not understand why this child, he was the second child, why he could not behave. And they're not wealthy folk. They're country folk. Didn't have a lot of money, and they did not have a lot of education, and they were just bewildered by this, and that he was insubordinate, and undisciplined, unruly. And so one day John came in and he sat down next to me, and the first thing in the morning, put his head down on his desk. And I said, "Are you sick?" Because his head was never down. And he looked up and his eyes were bloodshot. And I said, "Are you sick?" And he goes, "No, I'm on medicine." And I said, "Well, then you're sick." He goes, "No, my mom got me medicine." I said, "What's it for?" He goes, "I don't know." And I inquired of his parents what had happened, and they had him diagnosed, and they were giving him Ritalin at the time. They could never get his dosage straight, and it broke my heart. This child who was funny, who was smart, who had, a bit of a problem with his attention and impulsivity, was now somebody I did not know. I didn't even recognize, and I couldn't recognize, and it was distressing, to say the least. It was distressing, and it sparked me, having my background in science, math, physics, computer programming, to do something. The question was, what could I do? And I thought, well, I'll create a program that will help John learn the things he needs to learn. So I began to work 3 jobs, 6 days a week, to develop Play Attention, and it came out in 1994. During that span of time, John did well with me, the best we possibly could manage these circumstances all year. And he went on to be in and out of jail in his high school days. And then he was self-medicating. So he was using drugs, and things went downhill. And I didn't have Play Attention developed till, 6 years later, 6 years of R&D. I did discover that NASA was using neurotechnology to look at states of hypoarousal, which would be very boring, work, and hyperarousal, a very overexciting work. And I enhanced it, and we developed Play Attention so that we could work with students like John. And John, the students with ADHD will be part of our topic today, and neurodiverse children. So that's where all of this comes from. I mean, it's a huge passion we all have had for many, many years at Play Attention, to help children and adults figure out how to maneuver their way through this world and learn the skills they didn't have. And that's going to be part of what we learn about self-regulation today. I'll get into that in more detail as we move forward. What we'll cover is parenting, and the parenting a neurodiverse child as well. The challenges for just regular parents of a neurotypical child, and the challenges for parenting a neurodiverse child. Then we want to discuss the common goals for developing independence, because this is common. Doesn't matter if your child's neurodiverse or if your child is neurotypical. We have common goals typically that we want as parents. And if you're here to discuss independence, then you know exactly what kind of challenges this actually is ahead for us, right, as a hurdle. We also will talk about what self-regulation is, and then the connection between self-regulation and independence. We also want to talk about the nexus between self-regulation, parenting, and then dependence. So we want to look at it from both angles today. Then we'll finish up with fostering and nurturing independence and self-regulation for independence. Again, we will take questions as we go through. I will get to them at the very end of the webinar. But please, if you do have questions or concerns, you can type them in the chat. So obviously, parenting, just as my challenges were with John, every parent faces this journey where you love this human being, yet at times we can't quite fathom how to surmount these challenges that our children give us. And we want to help them develop to be the happiest they can be, no matter what the circumstances they have now, whether they're neurotypical or neurodiverse. We still want to be able to fill them with hope and of a brighter future, and being able to be happy. So I think it's obvious to every parent here that when you had your first child, this phrase is absolute truth. It requires massive changes to your lifestyle. No matter what your lifestyle, when you have that first one, your whole focus shifts from two to this one new being that we've brought into our life, right? And it does take an incredible amount of patience, listening, and teaching. We have to understand that a child starts learning in the womb. Now, you probably already know that, but this is incredibly important to what we're going to talk about today, because how we learn certain skills depends much on the parent. It does depend much on teachers at school as well, but it starts at home, right? It starts when they're in the womb. And this is not just Freer talking, this is science we've known for many years now. And of course, if we have a neurodiverse child, this comes with many of its own unique set of hurdles. And we'll discuss those as well as we travel this journey together. Neurodiverse children, it says here, may require a different approach. Neurodiverse children definitely require a different approach in how we teach. And it starts by understanding their circumstances. And I'll go into this just a little bit more as we move forward. So these last three, it requires the utmost in patience and understanding, listening and teaching. When we do that, it makes not only the child's life better, but yours as a parent better. Because when we understand what we're facing, and we're all here to do that a little bit better today, when we understand what we're facing, then it helps us maintain our patience. It enables us to listen more, and then it helps us to teach them. I did a webinar, maybe it was a month ago, on the lessons learned from Ted Lasso and how we can develop good executive function. How would Ted Lasso have done it? And the positive way of learning. Didn't anybody here? You can put your hand up for me. Anyone here familiar with the series Ted Lasso? All right, it's one of the best shows ever done on network TV. I think it was on Apple TV network. It is a tremendous show, and I based that webinar on it. You can see it; it's on online now, but it is really enlightening to talk about the art of listening and teaching and patience and positive reinforcement. The challenges that we face make the journey kind of daunting, and it seems that our patience is often short. We don't have a lot of empathy because as adults, obviously, we are faced with daily stress. And children are part of this, can be part of it. They're part of the joy, but they can also be part of the stress. And we have to be able to parent with patience and empathy and using good strategies. If we're doing this, it's entirely possible, whether they're neurodiverse or whether they are neurotypical, to be able to make significant changes. But remember, as parent, you are key in this. We do have common goals, whether they're neurotypical or neurodiverse. We have typical goals, right? We all want them to grow into independent and self-reliant individuals. We want them to make their own good decisions and to discover what happiness is in their life. And that means finding their way through their own life. Now, some of you may have a 30 or 40-year-old child or adult that is yours now living. It's your son or your daughter living in your basement, living in your house still. They haven't figured out how to become independent. And so the basis of this, and if that is not a problem for you, if there is no conflict in having that experience where they will live with you the majority of their life or all of their life, if that's not a problem with you, then this webinar may be irrelevant, right? But for those of you who want to see them grow and become happy individuals who explore the world, this is often a common goal that we share as parents. And we want to see how we can develop that. And that, again, is the goal of today's presentation. We're going to talk about what self-regulation is here. And I'm going to start with another story. And I hope you enjoy these stories because they're true. It's real life coming into your room with you right now. So I have a lovely niece who has anxiety. And my wife and I talked with her about this because she's not neurodiverse. She's very neurotypical, but she has anxiety. And so she was spending a lot of time during the day. She works hard. She is an energizer bunny, works extraordinarily hard. But she was spending a lot of her day in social media, on social media. And she actually had nightmares. And we were telling her, you know, you have to listen very carefully. And I'm telling this to you as parents now, that some of the fundamental things in life are extremely important for self-regulation, for the act of being able to make good decisions for ourselves, for the ability to control and regulate my emotions, for the ability to plan and organize, make good decisions. This is all self-regulation, but it relies, it's a mind-body balance. So it relies heavily on, number one, getting good sleep. Now, my niece has excellent sleep. You know, she works so hard, her body has trouble keeping up with her. So she sleeps well. Nutrition, good nutrition. This was a problem for her. She did not, you know, typical 20-something, single, just eating whatever, and not good. All right. She was on social media a tremendous amount. Right? And then I think the last thing that we were talking to her about is getting some exercise. You know, her life was going to work, working really hard, coming home, eating some junk food, going to sleep, being anxious, spending some time on social media right as she goes to sleep. And this is something that's true of many kids now. I think a majority of kids, you know, they go to sleep with their phone in their hand, texting or surfing social media. The average teen is, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, is between 12 and 16 hours a day on screen. They will fall asleep chatting with their friends on social media. And then we wonder why they're not functioning well. So this is a problem. This is why I initially asked you to relieve yourself of the cell phone if you were not watching the webinar on it. So we asked our niece to start getting away from social media, because what the eyes and ears consume, the brain consumes, is the way it shapes the brain. And so for many of us here, I'm simply saying the same thing. If you are struggling and have a lot of stress, then we have to understand that what we are feeding our brain is the way that the brain tends to wire itself. If we are doing the same habits as my niece, we have the same habits, then we're going to get a bad outcome. And I can tell you, though, that our niece actually listened to us. She goes to work, then gets through with work, goes to the gym, works out. She prepares a nice meal for herself and is able to sleep through the night without having nightmares. Anxiety is incredibly decreased. Now, did you notice the part that I omitted there? Does anyone notice what part I said nothing about now that she's changed her life around? Anyone notice? It was the fact that she does not get on social media any longer. She stays away from it. And so, by the way, if you're not in watching the news, Meta or Facebook is being sued by a number of states because of its addictive properties, and it is developed to be specifically addictive. And it can be quite harmful. And so this is why the lawsuits are happening in various states, and it's happening now to Facebook today. So it's very important to understand what we put in to the brain actually affects the way it operates, and that affects our self-regulation. Now, when we are trying to become independent, we need to be able to regulate, self-regulate. That means I need to be able to manage my impulses, manage and make responsible decisions. And then I've got to be flexible. I'm going to have certain mental flexibility so that if something changes in my life, I can make a change. I can adapt to changes in my life, or I can make responsible decisions to help me adapt, which is what my niece did. She listened and made some really good changes in her life, and it has changed her world incredibly. And this happens when you offer an empathetic ear. You're listening and understanding, and you can give them some guidance, and hopefully they take you up on it. You know, sometimes they do, sometimes they do not. In this case, we were very fortunate and have a very good relationship. So she listened, and she's doing extraordinarily well now with some simple changes, very simple changes. How is self-regulation connected to independence? Now, let's talk about what self-regulation is. Let's start with conflict resolution. For self-regulation, I have to be able to determine, because our lives are filled, let's face it, our lives are filled with conflict. Could be on a very minor scale, could be an argument with mom and dad, could be problems at school. Our lives are filled with conflict. And if we don't know how to manage that, we don't know how to be able to control or negotiate or be able to resolve conflicts, I will constantly depend on a third party. Is it mom and dad? Is it one of my teachers? Is it my grandmother and grandfather? Is it my rabbi? Is it my priest? Who could it be that I rely on for conflict resolution if I can't figure it out myself? Sometimes it's nice to have a third party in, but for the most part, if we're building independence, we want to be able to resolve conflicts on our own accord. Responsibility is also the next in the list. I need to be accountable, right? If you as a parent have, and I have seen this many times, if you deny that your child was responsible when they actually were, then it teaches them they do not need to be accountable. Or if you have done it and shown it to them that you're not accountable, then they learn this. Remember, they learn by watching you. Once they're out of the womb, They learn by watching mom and dad, whoever their close circle is around, but primarily mother and father. I need to be able to make good decisions on my own. How do I do this? Because none of this just comes automatically. But this is one of the most powerful statements you'll hear today. This is all learned. How do we learn this? How do we learn to make good decisions? Right? This is very, very important. Organization and planning. How do we learn that? We don't think that we learn it. I think many people think that it is just part of who we are as humans. It is not. We have a blank slate that is filled as we grow. And we learn all of these things. Emotional regulation. How do I control my emotions so I don't respond by being just kind of angry and furious over something that could be very minor? How do I emotionally regulate? All of these are learned, but they are critical to self-regulation and independence. And this is incredibly important, because if we are not teaching them, then how are our children to learn them? Is it school that's going to teach this? Anymore, schools don't take a lot of responsibility for the child. They usually will come to you regarding that. Conflict resolution, sometimes the schools will, but it's easier just to have a zero tolerance policy. So if you're in a conflict, out you go. We have a zero tolerance policy for it at school. You see how it's moved? The shift is so that we are not doing this so much in school, at least here in the States, and that it is shifted more toward parents. And so this is so important for you to understand at this point. And to be honest with you, one of the things that I did when I taught was teach responsibility, conflict resolution, and decision-making, planning. I did all of this. It wasn't in the North Carolina curriculum. I was with a group from university called Democracy and Education. Democracy and Education. How to make a good citizen. How do we build people that understand the way that we live and what our values are and that kind of thing. And then, of course, one of my professors had written books on values and training values in the classroom. So, being a maverick in education, I actually created our own government in classroom. We had president, vice president. We had our own criminal justice system in the classroom so that they could learn all of this. And then we also were on teams that did several different things. There's probably so much I could tell you about the crazy way that we all learned at that time. But we would actually, when we were trying to make a decision, maybe we were going to film a movie on the history of Russia, which was part of North Carolina curriculum. In order to make good decisions about building a storyboard, we would put up the pros and cons of some of the questions we had, right? And what values we wanted, what did we want to do? What is the pro? What is the con? We would make that list, and then we would come to a decision together. So in essence, I was teaching decision making for them, right? To them, learning with them. That gave them the ability to plan and organize. Do you see how these are starting to relate? And this was all being done in a classroom setting, right? Then emotional regulation. How do we do that? How do we teach that? How do we say, I like the way you did that. When we watched, this is a way to help when we're actually teaching it, that when we're doing this together, we want to understand that we can guide them in a direction and help them with even regulating their emotions, right? So in this case, when we're talking about emotion regulation, when I saw something good happen, I let them know. I reinforced that. And the reinforcement came as, I liked what you did there. When they were escalating, you de-escalated. You took a few deep breaths. That was wonderful. And I would say that in front of other students. I never gave them, wild praise, like, you're a genius, this was so great. I just said, I like the way you did that, which gave them a very powerful sense of self-regulation, and you're reinforcing that. That's how they learn it. So all of this can be taught. Now, when we have a neurodiverse student, that means that typically, whether it is Asperger's or it is ADHD, autism, then executive function is commonly a bit deficit. It's weak. All right. In other words, ADHD, for the most part, is a problem of executive function. And all of these elements that we've been discussing here are part of executive function. Let's talk about this nexus between self-regulation, parenting, and dependence. Now, this is something that you may not realize, but we'll take a poll as we're talking. When you hover, some of you may have noticed, if you hover over your child, neurotypical or neurodiverse, and you're working on homework together, if you struggle through it, your child can remember, let's say it's multiplication tables, and you're going over multiplication tables, and you drill it with flashcards, and they've got it. And then the very next day, they go to school, and they take the test, and they don't have it. How many people have experienced that? Hands raised. Good. Keep them coming. All right. Quite a few of us here have seen that. All right. You can help and guide your children to make good decisions if you're around. You work on that. But then when they get back to school or they're out with their friends, you question whether those decisions that they made were that good. Anybody here? Does that resonate at all? All right. Perfect. How about now? Your child can finish a task if you're standing over them. Anybody? That makes sense? Right. And then your child can get organized if you're standing, if you're hovering. Anybody notice that? And then you can plan, your child can make a plan with you, but if they go back to school or if they're out with their friends or maybe even their grandparents, it seems to fall apart. It doesn't work. So there's this real inconsistency between when you are able to be near and help guide, and then what falls apart when they're away from you or back at school. And so here is the answer to why that actually happens. Why? Because at the moment you're hovering, and you can see here, mom is really struggling to get through all of this in this picture. But at that moment, you are your child's executive function. You are helping them try to learn executive function, but their brain is not equipped to and doesn't have it fully learned. They understand it, but it is typically deficit or weak. But your brain is acting as their self-regulation, as their executive function at the time. And so while they're with you, your brain connected to their brain, it's a substitute. It provides enough for them to be able to function and have some semblance of order while you're there, but apart. And this is typically for neurodiverse children. ADHD is probably the prime example here. The things that I said in the previous slide about them being able to do this if you hover, and then the inconsistency when you get back to school the next day, happen because you are acting as their self-regulation, as their executive function. They don't possess it internally, so they require your brain to do it for them. And this is why it's confusing to parents. It's confusing to us why they can do it with me when I'm hovering and standing over them, and why they cannot do it when they're not with me. They don't possess the skill. And commonly what we have found at Play Attention over the past 30 years of working with these students is they have a difficult time learning them. Now, can they learn to do them? Yes, and that is why we developed Play Attention. And let me actually mention this as well. When we're talking about self-regulation and executive function, and we'll talk a little bit more about it here as we go through, what I do want to make certain you understand is that you can do an assessment. You can take an independent assessment online. It's called the BRIEF, Behavioral Rating Inventory of Executive Function. It's really good. We can help guide you through it if you would like to do that, so that you have an understanding of what you're up against, where the weaknesses are, where the strengths are in executive function. I would highly suggest that you type in the word assessment. And then later on, today or tomorrow, you'll get a call or an email from us so that you can take the brief with your child. So when you have that kind of information, it tells you exactly what it is that you need to be working on, which executive function. So if you want the assessment, just type in the word assessment, and then we'll have someone contact you. Remember, when they call, if you want to do the assessment, it would be really good to pick up the phone when they call you, because they can't talk to you if you don't pick up the phone. So they'll leave you a message and they'll contact you in email, but it's good to pick up the phone. They'll do the assessment with you so you can understand exactly what it is you're facing, because now we see there's a huge nexus between self-regulation, which is a part of executive function, and how we get them to be independent. Now, and I'm going to go back because I started off on getting the assessment and doing the assessment, which is SMART, you're acting as your child's executive function. You are part of your child's brain, and they don't possess a great executive function initially, so they require your brain to do it for them, and this builds dependence. If mom or dad are around, I can do it. I'm okay. And that's because of the way that you're kind of guiding them, giving them cues, those kinds of things. The problem with cueing and giving guidance is that it only lasts as long as you're there. When they're independent and taking that test, they'll have an emotional breakdown. Anyone experience that here with your child? When they start to test and all of a sudden when they're with you, they have done incredibly well. They start taking that test and they melt down, they cry. They can't do it. I can't do it. And they come back and you go, how did you do on the test today? I'm certain I messed up. I blew the whole thing. I couldn't remember anything. Many people here probably have experienced that because they're dependent upon you. So parents often wonder when we have a child or one of our children who are living with us and they're 30, 40 years old and they've never become independent. How did we get here? We wanted this child to be independent. We wanted this child to go out into the world and discover, to have adventure, to have fun, to be happy. And I find myself here. I'm driving him around. I'm driving her around, and I'm doing their laundry for them. And it's just like they've not learned anything. So this is so important for you to realize that there are certain things you need to do along this journey that help them, give them the tools to be independent. Do you follow? Does everyone understand? Is this clear and it's not too abstract? Can you give me a hand up if we're on the same path? Everyone following at this point? Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. So how do we foster it for self-regulation? Remember, we are the primary contributor, right? We are the teacher at home. So we will model self-regulation. Maybe I stub my toe and my child sees me stub my toe and I scream at the top of my lungs and curse. That's not modeling good self-regulation. Believe it or not, it may seem funny, and it is kind of funny, but it teaches them that if they have a problem, they can just reach out and let it rip. If we handle it well, right? They're riding with us in the car and we're in parking and someone bumps our bumper. Do I get out and start to cry or yell at the other person? How I approach the situation is what they are learning. So if I want to have them learn good self-regulation, I must be the one that shows what that is. This is very strong. I will model it. I will be their teacher because the first and foremost way that they learn in the womb is through sound. When they're out of the womb, it's through vision. They watch. They watch like crazy. So you may say, do this, but you're doing something entirely different. They're going to do what you do. They're not going to do what you say. They're going to do what you do because that's their model. Now, teaching emotional intelligence, right, is another way, right? How do I problem solve? How do I take this problem? It's an emotional problem, and I figure my way around it. How do I do that? I model that for them. I offer constructive feedback, and I mentioned this a little while ago when I was talking about using over-the-top type of praise. You're a genius. That was brilliant. You're so good. Those types of phrases are almost as destructive as telling them you're a loser. This is no good. That's terrible work. We need to be in the middle of that. We need to reinforce positively, but we don't need to tell them they're a genius unless they're Albert Einstein or Stephen Hawking. We need to tell them the truth. And to do that, we reinforce what they did, their actions, not who they are or who they think they are. We reinforce their actions. So if we saw a conflict between brother and sister, and brother said, I'm okay, it's yours. You just go ahead and take it. And we'll settle it like that. And he walks away. And you look at your child and you can put your hand on his shoulder and say, I like the way you did that. That you were very kind. She really wanted that. And that was really kind. So you're teaching kindness. You're teaching them to have self-regulated and not go over the top and get mad. Right? You're just reinforcing that. You're not telling him he's a genius. You're just reinforcing his actions with positive reinforcement. I hope this is making sense. We also have to set realistic expectations. They are not going to learn what we are teaching here overnight. It's not going to happen quickly. If they're neurodivergent, there are so many things, especially with ADHD, that cause executive function to be weaker in particular areas. The parts of those on the brain of an ADHD child typically are slower in development than their peers that are neurotypical. So we want to make certain we understand that. And so there, when I said you would have to use different training methods, we'll go into that in just a little bit, but you should, with a neurodivergent child, use different training methods than just this. You'll have to use other ancillary support strategies, and I'll go into that in just a minute. So we want to set realistic expectations, because if we set expectations that are too high, we will never reach them. And what happens when we do that? We set expectations that are too high, or the child sets expectations that are too high. What happens? Can anyone say? I know you know. You've seen it. It just becomes kind of daily practice, and you don't really understand. Debbie says it's failure. And typically that's right. When I fail, I set them too high. I fail. I can't reach it. So I say, I'm a failure. I'm never going to do this. And then the next thing you hear, how many people have heard this? I quit. I'm not doing it anymore. I can't do it. Our Aunt Elram says, they also feel shame. And that's true too. But there is no reason to do that. By setting realistic expectations, and I, as a parent, I advocate something that they can, if it's tying your shoes. When we're teaching them to tie their shoes, we're going to have this by Friday. We may or we may not have it by Friday. But let's say that they made their first loop and they haven't figured out how to make their second loop. I'm not going to tell them we're going to have it by Friday. I'm going to say, do you think we could get the part where we get our second loop ready by Friday? A few days from now, do you think we can get that ready? And they'll go, yeah, I can do that. I can do that. And we'll train it. So we're setting up something that they can do. And then when they hit that, they make that second loop. What do I say? Do I say, you're a genius? Do I say, oh, that was just brilliant? You say, perfect. I like that. That's super. Let's do this now. Right? We're not telling them they're a genius, not telling them they're brilliant. I like what you did right there. Let's now try the knot. We'll cross those loops and we'll have a square knot. Let's try that. Or a bow knot. Whatever it is we want them to do, we make it simple and set realistic. And then by doing that, we can help them. That actually provides a bit of autonomy. Because if they're able to set expectations and have great self-regulation, we've offered constructive feedback, then we're on the road to autonomy. Other skills that typically, especially neurodiverse children have, are in organization. You can look at their room. You've asked them to clean their room countless times. You go up there and it looks like a tornado hit it. Anyone here understand that? That resonate at all? Their organization skills are none. You look in their backpack and it looks like someone got in there. Looks like some mice took over and found a home in there. These all are necessary skills for independence. And we have to be able to teach them. So even if they're neurodivergent, you have to start giving them the ability to do these. Organization is hard for them, typically. ADHD particularly. That part of the brain is not functioning at its peak. So we can help them by giving them the ability to set some organizational tasks that are within reach. The expectations are not going to be outlandish. And the more that we can show them they can do this, the more that they will the part of the brain that is in charge of organization will get stronger. We can teach them time management. And that time management, sometimes, you can stand there with a stopwatch, which makes them dependent on you. Or we can give them a kitchen timer, show them how to use it and say, let's get this done. In 10 minutes, I want this floor cleaned up. 10 minutes. Here we go. It's entirely capable. They're entirely capable of doing it. So we give them a timer, which makes them independent of me. I don't stand there looking at my watch. If I have to stand there maybe once or twice, then the goal will be that they will use a timer on their own, right? So we may have to take this in steps, incrementally, right? We want to encourage responsibility. So we give them things that help them become responsible. We give them things to do that they are responsible for. Now, how do we set that up? Well, we have a cat or a dog at home. I need you to feed Bullet. We'll set up a schedule. You can split it with your sister. Every other day, you will be there to feed Bullet. But you have to monitor when you do that, because Bullet may go hungry if you don't. But if you do monitor it and you do give positive reinforcement, then typically we can teach them to be responsible. Teaching to be responsible for another living thing is a great way to do it, because they have a vested interest in that living thing. If they love Bullet, the chances of them succeeding there are quite higher, much higher than if they're just trying to do it on their own with something that's really abstract to them. And then we want to give them choice. Now, we don't want to give them outrageous choices, and this is something I've watched many parents do. They let the child make every choice possible. And remember, if they're neurodivergent, then their ability to control making choices is severely restricted. Remember, their brain is slightly delayed. So if you're giving them that, you're opening yourself up for a world of misery and choices that are poor. And then that reinforces internally for them that they are unequipped, and they feel, as the folks here already said, shame and failure and all the rest of it. And you're building a very, very bad cycle, but we don't want to stand over them so that they become dependent on us. So we start by giving them simple choices, right? For dinner tonight, Bruce is here. Hey, Bruce, I saw that you're here. Bruce attends almost every webinar we have, and he uses Play Attention. So, Bruce, tonight you can either have broccoli or spinach. What's your choice? Bruce goes, I don't want either one of them. And I say, Bruce, I didn't ask you whether you wanted either one. I said, which one do you want? Either you can make the choice or I'll make the choice. What would you like? Well, if I have to, it'll be broccoli. So we've given them the ability to make the choice. Those little things count. The problem, I think, in parenting is that we have so many things to do as parents now. And how do we find the time to set up an environment where we can teach all of this? We have limited time. There's homework, there's soccer, there's karate, there's piano, there's swim class. When do we find the time to do this? And the problem, and I'll tell you an interesting story. I was on Good Morning America. I've been on Good Morning America, which is a good morning TV show on ABC here in the United States. I know we have global viewers here. And I showed Play Attention, and they had a mother from New Jersey, and she was just showing the total chaos. When kids had their books out on the dining room table doing homework, she's trying to get dinner ready. It's total chaos. And they were asking her, would she use something like Play Attention? She goes, well, I think it's a great idea. When am I going to find the time to do it? Well, it only takes, an hour per week, and you can break that schedule up any way you want. But the idea is, if I can't do it, if my life is total chaos, I have to set up a time in which I can teach this. And that's the basis of Play Attention, by the way, is that we teach executive function using neurotechnology. It's incredibly efficient to do that. But if we have to have a value set personally to desire to make those changes, is everybody with me? I have to know that I don't have the time to do all of this and make it really good for a child that requires an incredible amount of empathy, an incredible amount of patience, and an incredible amount of time. So I can structure it so that I can help. So you have to internally make the decision that this is of value. Either I make them independent and my life easier and their life easier, or I keep them dependent and then we both live in misery, a certain amount of misery or stress for a long period of time. I hope that makes things a little bit more understanding about why we do these kind of things. Decision making, right? Good decision making. How do we teach it? Same way, we model it. Effective communication. How do we teach that? We model it. If you're having an argument between brother and sister, you can help mediate. But we want to show them the way to do it. The problem again is for a neurodiverse child, this is not going to last unless you're hovering. We have to repeat it more and in a cycle or programmatic fashion so that they can learn this. And they can. Their brains will do it. We've seen it for 30 years. That's why we're still here. We celebrate that progress, right, on the action. We're celebrating the action. I love the way the two of you settled that today. That was absolutely fascinating to watch. It was really good, the way that you settled it. You didn't fight. I really appreciate you two doing that. Then, if all else is failing, we can always seek a therapist. We can talk to the pediatrician. They're pretty limited, especially when you're in a pediatrician's office. You have 5 minutes with a pediatrician. They're going to try to decide everything in 5 minutes, 10 minutes. That's the way medicine is run in this country, and it's a shame. But sometimes you can go to a therapist and you can pay them to try to get them to teach these things. Again, they have to model them and repeat them over and over and over again. So this could take quite a long time. To improve executive function, again, I'll just do this quickly so that you understand. This is what we built. It's neurotechnology that allows them, puts them in an environment where they're learning all of this. And this unit that you see here, the body wave unit, sits on their arm and allows them to control these exercises that teach all of the things I just talked about. But they control them by their attentive state. They have to focus in and they learn how to learn spatial memory, working memory, planning and organization, finishing tasks, sustaining their attention, filtering out distraction. All of those things they need, we actually teach in a program where they only have to use it an hour per week. They could use it more, but you don't want to burn them out. So they work on all of this. The inhibitory, which would be impulse control, planning and organization, prioritization, task, starting tasks. If you're an adult, you oftentimes know that you will start 20 things and you finish none of them. Any adults here recognize that in themselves? Yes. Self-monitoring, the ability to self-check. Am I doing this? How many people here use an online mindfulness app? Anybody here use that? Something like Calm or one of those things you can buy, and you use this mindfulness app and you get into it, and it's usually just a video they'll play for you and say, hey, be mindful for 20 seconds. And so you stare at this video for 20 seconds and you have no idea if you've been mindful or not. Is everybody with me? Because you don't have any indicator. You know, you can be 10 seconds in the video and start thinking about what bills you got to pay and what you're making for dinner. So we don't have an ability. The technology I just showed you, the neurotech, actually lets us self-monitor. We can see what our brain's doing in real time. The ability to change direction when we need to, mental flexibility, right? Emotion regulation. All of these things are critical. Thank you, Cassandra. Hopefully we'll talk to you soon. This is what Play Attention does, and we'll be doing Play Attention's webinar next week. If you would like to attend that webinar, please just type in webinar. They'll send you a link to it so you can actually see it in action, how we do this. You can also request an executive function assessment. That's the one we talked about. So if you would like to do the brief so that you can understand the most you will ever understand probably about executive function and where you or your child falls on that scale, I would just type in assessment. We'll call you or send you an email so that you can do it. Then, the staff will need to work with you probably after you do the brief assessment for about 45 minutes to go over all of the data with you so you fully understand what it is you're looking at. All right, so that's all part of taking the brief. They will talk to you about self-regulation. They'll talk to you about finishing tasks, planning, and organizing. So it's a real benefit just to know what you're looking at rather than just looking at a bunch of data and not knowing what you're looking at. So they'll take about 45 minutes with you to do that once you take the assessment. Then if you want, you can schedule a live consultation and a demo. This would take probably about anywhere from 45 minutes to 50 minutes, I would think. So if you want a consultation and demo, please just write in consultation, and you'll have someone contact you about doing a consultation with you. You can discuss all of your particular concerns at that point as well. And you could do that with the after the assessment if you wanted. As well. This would all help you with all of this so that you have a direct program and a direct approach on how to do all of this. Thank you, everyone. I so appreciate it. It is absolutely fantastic for us to be able to share this time. Thank you, Zoom, for providing the technology to do this. And we look forward to working with you soon. And I hope this was helpful for you to understand, and it has made a small change in the way that you view life and helped you somewhat today. Thanks again.